talk about food safety and all the gadgets, all the fun things that you can find, and we will also go to Facebook. I tried to do it here. That's not my thing. I can do the phone. And I will talk to you about our website as well, where you can see everything. So, but before we do that, I'll talk about everything that's on the table. Okay? So these are all the gadgets and tools that we use. Some are old, some are new, to preserve our food. There is a difference with our pressure canner and the water bath canner. Okay, the pressure canner is for foods that grow in the garden. Let's think about the pH scale. You have 0 to 14. 7 is neutral to water. Falls from a tree, go to water bath it. And this is our electric water bath canner. It's so wonderful. So wonderful. You don't have to worry about picking up a heavy water bath. And I've got the original, but you go on the stove. Got that too. But anyway, if it falls from a tree, 7 and below, it's an acidic food, your jams, your jellies, pickled foods, things of this nature. And you have to water bath them. The garden, 7 and up, they're alkaline. So you would have to have them in the pressure canner. So what else does that mean? So we'll go back to water bath canning. You've got your fruits that have natural pectin. Then you have the pectin that you're going to add if you choose to make that jam or jelly that way. And then you add your sugar. So you've got the pectin and the sugar, and they come together. And they don't like water coming in. So they have such a bond through the acidity in the fruit and the sugar and the pectin that you add. It's going to push that water away. That's the reason why we can keep our jams and jellies so much longer than we can our pressure can foods. The water activity, or the water that we want to stay away, will be not active for a very long time from the alkaline foods. The jams and jellies usually last, well, they don't last at my house, at least 2 to 3 years. So that's a good thing. So what if you open up your favorite, oh my gosh, I love strawberry jam, peach preserves. Okay, you open it up and you see all these bubbles on top. That is water activity that has come away from the fruit, and it's run through the sugar, it's run through all of these things, and it forms mold on top.
Even though your jar is sealed?
Even though the jar is sealed.
Okay.
Even though the jar is sealed. That's good. Good comment, good question. Even though that jar is sealed, there's several things that can happen there. Number one, with the mold, it could be that the sugar, there wasn't enough sugar put in there, or there could have been something on the jar, there could have been something on the lid, or it could have been that it's just sat there too long. And a lot of people want to open that jar up, look and take the bubbles off and throw it away. Mold is, if you see it on top, it's through the whole jar. So scraping the bubbles off and throwing it away, it's not going to do you any good. So it's just to throw that away and just go to the next jar. So the sealing part, it could be that you put the lid on too tight, or you didn't put it on tight enough, or it could be storage. When you store your canned goods, water bath or pressure, cool, dry place, no hot and cold change all the time. Example, this lady had pickles. She said, I had jars and jars and jars of pickles. She opened it up and she said, I tasted downy softener in the pickles. And I was like, okay, that's weird. And I said, where did you store them? Oh, I store them above my dryer. Well, when you have a washer and dryer, when you use that dryer, it gets hot. Well, we don't see the seal come up. Well, when it cools down after that dryer's quit, it gets cold in that room again, well, it's going to seal again. Well, the opening and the closing is going to let those bacteria, all of those scents, all of those things that we are supposed to smell, but now we taste. So you have to make sure that you are using the right jars, and we'll get to that in a minute. Storing them. Storage is so very important because you can go through all of these important steps using the right kind of canner, but if that temperature is wrong, it's going to be a waste. You're going to have to throw all of your hard work away. So that's the, even though it does seal, answer. It could be one little bitty drop of water. It could be that the lid was prepared the wrong way. So what does that mean? There's glue on each of your lids. I'll tell you about my little detail in a minute. There's glue here for epoxy. If you boil this, it breaks this all down. You put it on your jar, you do your rings, even though you process it the correct time, and every recipe is different. Don't think that every recipe that you have is going to be canned the same way. It is not. Don't memorize. Go to USDA, the Home Food Preservation Site. Tested recipes, works every time. If this is broken down, it's not ever going to make a seal, ever. You just heat them, simmer, no boiling. Some of them, by instructions, and always read your instructions, won't even have to be in warm water at all. It's going to be an instant seal once they go into the canner, whichever food you prepare. Then with the water bath, jams, jellies, all of those acidic foods, they go into the water bath canner and the jar is covered at least 2 inches above the water. Think about it this way. When you're taking a shower, you want a lot of water. Water bath. If you pressure can, you're washing your hands. You want a lot of pressure to get the dirt off. You only need pressure in here and a little bit of water. So when you process your water bath canner, regardless of whether you have an electric canner or if you have the standard water bath canner, you have to have the jars in the water covered to make sure that there's going to be a good seal. With all of that, regardless of whether it's water bath or pressure, when you put your lids and your rings on, when you tighten that ring, it only needs to be fingertip tight. It just has to stop. If you keep pushing that and you put it into the water bath canner or the pressure canner, it's just thin metal. And once it goes under pressure, and if it's too tight from the ring, it's going to bend. And when that bends, it takes grip of this glass, and we think, well, they are made for canning, and yes, they are. You can use these over and over and over again until they are broken. If this happens and it buckles up under that ring, this is broken. Shards are going to be so tiny you can't see them. And then when you put the food, when you're not supposed to, some people will open that can even though the lid is buckled. Don't do this because you will eat glass. You'll eat glass every time. So that is for both water and pressure. So let's talk about the pressure canner for a minute. So the pressure canner is for the foods that are above, grow up from the garden. Corn, pinto beans, y'all help me here. And you're garden involved. Green beans, tomatoes. Hold on to tomatoes. Who said tomatoes?
I did.
Hold on, and we'll talk about tomatoes in a minute, okay? And tomatoes too. You have to make sure that they are canned properly. So, there is nothing in your pressure canner foods, even meats. There's nothing there. Remember I said on the jams and jellies, you've got the sugar, you've got the pectin, they come together, and nothing will come in for a very long time. Well, when you've got the pressure canner, you have the food, you have the water. So if there's any bacteria or mold or anything in there, they have a party. And they're like, oh, I've got this great environment. I'm going to grow and multiply. Green beans, corn, any of these foods that are alkaline, you can grow botulism. And botulism, a drop, just a drop can kill you in 3 days. One of the recommendations that, through all testing, we can can any food except squash. The reason being, there's so much water content. You think about opening up a squash, what's in there? It's just seeds and a lot of water. I love squash. But it's best to blanch it, freeze it. You can grow botulism in that jar of squash. And it is very, very dangerous. I know a lot of people do it, but as USDA, with extension, food safety, we cannot tell you that it is safe to can squash. It is just dangerous. There's been test after test, and botulism is there. Now, botulism is in the soil. It's everywhere. We pass all kinds of spores every day, but putting it in an environment and creating it is just really, really scary. There was a family that canned green beans. They've been canning green beans their whole life. And the mother ate 3 the size of her pinky. She's been canning all of her life. They all went to the hospital and they had to wait to get out before they had her funeral because of eating the green beans. When you can, you put those green beans in a jar, you put them in a pressure canner, depending on whether it is a dial gauge, and we'll go over that, or a weighted gauge, you have to make sure that you're processing them with a gauge at 11 pounds pressure for so many minutes. Don't ever memorize. Go to a website, an extension website, USDA, and pints, quarts, read what they tell you. Go by that because it's very, very important that you do this. It's just so important, I just can't say it enough. Corn, I know that corn is like the longest that you can. It's an hour and a half. Creamed corn, corn on the cob, anything with corn in it. So let's say you want to make salsa. Salsa has vinegar. Vinegar is supposed to cure everything, right? Well, once you put corn into your homemade salsa, it becomes a pressure canner food because it has the corn in it. Corn is so very alkaline, you're not going to be able to kill it in the water bath canner. The pressure canner gets to 240 degrees. Water bath canner is just boiling water. You cannot kill anything alkaline in the water bath canner. This gets 240 degrees. Process it for the minute that the recipe tells you. The tested recipe from the extension of USDA, and then you process it according to the instructions. Okay, so weighted gauges and dial gauges. Our weighted gauge is right here. Our weights, you have, on this particular canner, you have 5 pounds, it's like a game piece, it's like Monopoly. Okay, this is 5 pounds. The next train is going to be 10 pounds. And your 10 pounds is going to be what you're going to can most of your foods on a weighted gauge. Now there are some special instructions and special recipes, again, read, look for that tested recipe, that you're going to have the full 15 pounds. Very, very rare, very rare. So just stick with your 10 pounds on the weighted gauge. Then you've got your dial gauge. This is going to measure your pounds per pressure. You still have to have the weight, because if you didn't have this weight in place to put right here, you would never have any pressure build up because the steam is going to go up. And you exhaust for 10 minutes, of course, but then if you don't have this to go on top of it, it's just going to go shh, and there you have nothing. And you're going to lose all your food. So that is the difference between a weighted gauge and a dial gauge. These can be tested, and we test them. You can call, and I'll come, test it, and it needs to be tested. It's not a need, it's a have to. It should be tested every year because water can get up into the gauge. It could be that something, I found one of them, I wanted to keep this counter so bad, but the lid had something weighted on it and it became warped. And no matter how much I tested it, it became warped too. So this has to be changed, and on that particular canner, you had to just get a whole nother canner. It made me so sad. So, but anyway, have this tested from year to year. This can be replaced. This particular All-American has no seal. This is my favorite because you don't have to worry about replacing it. Whereas on your weighted gauge, there is the seal. Have this, and it has to be tested. We don't test these, but we look at them to make sure that they're not cracked or dried out or anything like that. So, and a lot of your bigger canners like this, they have it as well. Regardless of whether you're water bath canning or if you are pressure canning, all of them have to have a rack. This keeps your jars from sticking to the inside of your canner. In a pressure canner, if you go past 11 pounds, 12, 13, that's okay, but once you get into the 15 and 20 pound pressure on a pressure canner, you can melt the jars to the bottom of the canner. This has to be in there. It doesn't matter, it has to be in there. Then in your regular, in the water bath canner that you put on the stove. It also has a rack, but it has this, you can see on the edge, put your cans in, down. Wonderful. This one came from Ball. You can go to the W store. I'm not supposed to tell you where to shop. But anyway, you can go to one of your stores and get the one that is black and white speckled, works just as good. If you choose to go to an estate sale and pick the canner up, look in it. If there's any thin parts in that water bath canner, the sun is going to shine right in because it's very thin, it's going to be worn, and you'll see every hole in the world that's in the bottom of that water bath canner. The pressure canner, the way you test it, how old is this? Is it rusted? What does this look like? Are you going to be able to replace this gauge once you buy it? Because some of the openings here are tiny. You can't test them. It's like you have to get a magnifying glass. So watch how you're purchasing these this equipment if you buy it from something like that. Now, when you go online order, just watch what you're paying for. Look at your prices, because this one I got on sale for $2.19. I was so excited. I went and looked a few years later because I wanted a second one. It was $700, and I was like, oh, I don't need one of those. I don't need one. So, yes, watch what you're shopping for, okay? Because you can really get yourself in a pickle, a big, huge one. Okay, so basic water bath canner, pressure canner, weighted and gauged. Now we go into the little fun stuff. Okay, this is an electric pressure cooker. There are some good things and there are some bad things about this. Okay, it's got the nifty little lock here. Great. Has your pressure vent. Okay. It even has the rack that you have to have for water bath and pressure. You can water bath and pressure in one of these. Has the, I keep this one wrapped up. I don't want to get it scarred. Okay, you have your regular pot here. And it has, it's just the crock pot. It has the little button at the bottom. But here's the drawback. It has all the digital things, and you mash the button, you follow the instructions. But this particular type of canner, it is good for jams and jellies, perfect. It is good for green beans, it would be good for your looser foods. Just go by instructions. But with the way that we have tested this, it is not a good idea, and we don't recommend that you can meats, any type of spaghetti sauce, because the pressure that it does build, it will not last as long as what the pressure is going to be in your old-fashioned weighted or your gauge canner. So if you choose to use this, read the instructions and go by their recipes, because the recipes that are included in this are the recipes that are not going to make you sick. So it's not a bad thing, but just read exactly how it is to use it. Then we have this other little gadget is it's a jelly maker. So it's kind of like a fancy crock pot. You have a jam and a jelly side. When you plug it in, you'll have your numbers up here. You'll tell it whether it wants to be a jam or a jelly. You put in the time and through instructions. Then you will set your pot down. I'll show you this too. It has a stirrer and it has the pot and it has its own little place to set. You go by the instructions. You put the juice and the sugar first, and then it times it. Stir, 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 and then it has the time to change and put your pectin in there and the lid. And then we have what we call the Instant Pot or the crock pot. This is one. It has a pot comes out just like the other, but we do not can in this. Even though there's a nice little button that tells you that you can, don't. Because we don't know how much pressure that's going to be built in this. This is great for doing pinto beans, cabbage, foods. It's quick. It's a cooker, not a canner. So when you put your foods in here, put the lid on there, and it tells you the event. You can find all kind of recipes, but they're not safe. And that brings me to people looking at YouTube. YouTube is YouTube. It's just like TikTok. Just no, don't, please don't. Because some of the practices that they have on there are just completely wrong. You can't just leave food in a canner and expect it to prepare itself. It's just not going to work, just like it's not going to work in here. You don't know, you just can't do it. Don't do it. USDA or go to any extension site that's throughout the United States. Best salsa recipe, Washington State. Gosh, so good. That salsa, just make it any way you want to. You can chicken and just not in these. Stick to your weighted and the dial gauge for that. So jars. When you're buying your jars, Ball, Mason, Kerr. When you're buying them on the internet, read. If it sounds too good to be true, guess what? It is too good to be true. A co-worker of mine bought quart jars because she does a lot of asparagus, which is fantastic. But the jars that she bought only had the lid for the jar and the screw band for the jar. Well, she didn't realize this until she started making other things with those jars. She went and got the wide mouth lids, which that were the jars, from her favorite store, and then she kept losing food. What am I doing wrong? It only came with one set of lids, and she can't find the lids or the tips anymore. Be careful what you buy. Be careful what you buy. Tools, other tools that you can, when you've got the right tools, you've got all your fruits and vegetables, you've got all your jars, and you think, okay, I'm going to use a mayonnaise jar. No, you cannot do this because this has already been heated for, which is, yes, tempered. Yeah, it is not going to stand another set of heat. Even the jars that you see that has the little measurements on there that I think spaghetti comes in sometimes, spaghetti sauce, just put them up, put something in there pretty, don't use them again because you will lose all of your product. So the tools that you use, it will make the good food. Ball, Mason, Kerr. Now, Golden Harvest, they are going to be better for your jams and jellies. They don't like being under pressure just a whole lot because we have had jars to break. Pure, it is going to be, they don't like to seal at all. They just don't like to seal. And I've also noticed that the tips are thinner now, even Ball and Mason and Kerr. And I think it's Kerr, we were discussing this earlier, somebody refreshed me, the two that come together, business-wise, was it Ball and Mason that joined together? I can't remember who I was talking about, but anyway, you can use these jars over and over again. Just make sure what you're purchasing. If you're going to use the jars over and over again, make sure you look at the tips, look at the tops to make sure there's no breakage. Okay, you've got these nifty little tools. Where is my, oh, yes, I told you I was going to tell you about this. This saves your hands from getting, this is in a boiling water. It's just a nice little magnet. It's a magic wand. It's the best thing. So what if you can't find these? I was going to do a class and I panicked. I thought, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? So I went to automotive and got one of these. It's a telescope magnet, but guess what? It does the same thing. It's so great. So, you know, in times of panic, you have to really work about this. Okay, so when your rings become rusty, get rid of them because it's going to rust into your food. It's going to make you're going to mess up what you've prepared. Always have measuring spoons, of course. Your timer, cutting boards, jar lifter, and this is a bubble freer. Yeah, you can get a plastic knife. Always you want to use plastic. You don't want to ever use anything glass because you'll scratch your jar. But this is the part that you free the bubbles with. Great. And this is a headspace measure. Headspace is the space between the product and top of the jar. When you have that, you are going to give this food breathing room to process. Going to bring up, going to suck it down, seal it. So you can measure an eighth, a fourth, half, whole inch. So what if you don't have this? You can do the measuring on the top of the jar. So from this point to this point is an inch. From this area down is a half. Keep moving up the jar. This is going to be a fourth. And if you move all the way up to the top, that's an eighth of an inch. Not very many recipes are going to ask for a eighth of an inch, but still good information to know. When you are using salt, make sure that you use canning salt because table salt is going to make it cloudy. Other recipes, it's not going to taste right. You really don't, you want to make sure that you're using this. So salt, I get a lot of calls about, well, I put salt in my green beans and I water bath them. You just got salty green beans that has botulism in them. You've got to make sure that you use that pressure canner. Well, I put lemon juice. There again, you've got lemon flavored green beans in a water bath canner with botulism. You've got to make sure that you're processing them in that pressure canner. 11 pounds pressure for the gauge, 10 pounds pressure for your weighted gauge. Okay? Tomatoes, and I'll end with tomatoes, and if y'all have any questions, it'll be great. Tomatoes, they have been altered so much that you have to make sure that you put some type of acidity in them. There again, a tested recipe, measure exact, because just guessing here and there, you're not going to have a safe food to eat. Even though tomatoes, yes, they do have the acidity in them, but now they don't as much because they are altered. So go by the recipe. If you're going to water bath the tomatoes, make sure it is 45 minutes, and that is just for what we have here in the book. This is our home food preservation book. We are about to start getting someone to help revise it. So you will always, always, always use this index, no matter how many times that you have done it. Go by the instructions. Please go by the instructions, because you don't want to make yourself or anybody sick or worse. So you look and this has blanching in it too. We didn't go over that, but we want blanching. If you're going to blanch something for 2 minutes, put it in ice water bath for 2 minutes. Freezing. Make sure when you freeze your food, regardless of what it is been blanched, and then you put it into a container that is airtight, because that is going to, and make sure you do not overfill that container, because ice is going to build because you're going to put it in the freezer. Well, that ice has got to have room too, and if you overfill it when you go to those green beans or whatever food that it is that you've frozen, guess what? The lid is going to be popped off, and it's going to taste like everything in the freezer. Label. Tell you a funny. We had gardens when I was a kid. We took care of our garden, which was 3. My parents, grandparents, each grandparent had 2, so that was 6, 7 gardens every summer. Well, we didn't label. Daddy didn't label. So he thought, well, I'm going to cook supper. Mom was working over. He had loved fried potatoes. Would eat fried potatoes till he's sick. So he thought it was going to be squash and potatoes. Well, it was apples. So we had fried apples and potatoes. And then he did it again, and it was apples and squash. Actually, they tasted pretty good. So every once in a while, I'll remind him of that. It's fun. So, but with any type of food preservation, find a tested recipe. Go by the instructions. Use the correct canner. Water bath, 7 and below. Pressure, 7 and above. You think about that pH scale. Ball mason Kerr, make sure you check your lids. Make sure you go by the instructions. Everything is listed on the USDA Home Food Preservation site or an extension site. And when this becomes new again, I'm so excited. That'll be available too. So do y'all have any questions? Ever gain pressure, because the way that the flat top stoves are arranged now, the element that goes into that stove gets to the temperature that it's designed to do, and each one of them is different. It stops. Well, if you've got a pressure canner boiling and it stops, you're going to lose pressure that quick. You're going to lose all your food. Also, if you've got a double-decker, the canner itself is already heavy. This is heavy. And you've got 7 to 8 jars or 14 jars, that is going to fall, it could possibly fall through. Now, a lot of people go to the coiled or the electric coiled, which is fine. But when you go to purchase, look in the center of that new coiled stove and make sure there's not a little button in the middle of it, because it's the same thing. It's a temperature regulator just like the flat top stove. Look what you're shopping for. And then there's gas. Cook on gas. Best thing to can, because you catch your pressure, you can gauge it, you can look at it, and never leave your canner. That's another thing. Don't ever leave your canner. When you start to can, you are dedicated, you're married to that canner for at least 2 or 3 hours. You can't go look at Facebook, you can't go talk on the phone, you can't go anywhere else. You are on a hot day. Really, it's hot. So make sure that you don't ever leave it. Always watch it. The stove. Any other questions? I'll have to refresh my memory because I know I'm leaving something out.
So what about squash pickles? You said don't can
Squash in
pickles.
like water and squash. Now, if you've got a relish, which is going to have vinegar in there, fine. The acid. And a lot of people have a lot of problem with acids as far as vinegars. Think of it this way. When you add too much water to Kool-Aid, what does it taste like? Water. If you add too much ingredients to vinegar, that vinegar is not going to be strong enough to pickle whatever is pickled, the process that you're trying to do. Measure, measure, measure. I can't stress that enough on things like that, because if you just keep adding, keep adding, keep adding, you're going to have Kool-Aid. That doesn't taste like Kool-Aid. And it's not going to process right. You're going to have mold. You're going to have all kinds of things growing in there that you don't want, and it can make you really, really sick. Very, very sick. So, looking to see if I missed everything.